Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's event. Special thanks to Fatima Ijaz from the University of Toronto, who set up the registration page and all Zoom-related parts of today's event. We'll be recording the presentation parts by the speakers and then stop the recording for the Q&A part. Please plan to post your questions to the Q&A part of the Zoom system, and we'll try our best to get to as many of the questions posted as possible. I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Hind Al-Abadleh, a professor of chemistry at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, which is situated on the traditional territory of the Neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. I am also the chair of ARRCU, a special interest group at the Canadian Meteorological and Oceanographic Society, and past chair of the Environment Division in the Chemical Institute of Canada, one of key supporters for today's workshop. ARRCU's open meetings and communication via their email listserv have been and continue to be a source of information and advocacy by and for atmospheric scientists, chemists, engineers from academia, government, and industry. Today's event is motivated by two reports. The first report is the Climate Science 2050 report by Environment and Climate Change Canada, released in 2021. This report emphasized the need to integrate local, regional focus in building healthy and resilient communities. We do that by engaging communities in climate science and climate action. These communities should reflect the diversity of the Canadian population who experience the impacts of climate change on their lives differently depending on their socioeconomic status. I will be posting the link to that report in the chat after I'm done with my intro. The second report is the one initiated by CMOS, with financial support from Environment and Climate Change Canada, entitled Improving Equity, Diversity, Inclusion and Accessibility, EDIA, in the Canadian Weather, Water and Climate Workforce. CMOS partnered with 6 organizations for this report, among them the Black Environmental Initiative, the Canadian Water Resources Association, and ArcticNet. This report identified systematic barriers from surveys by the Black, Indigenous, and non-white youth, early career professionals, and CMOS's membership demographics. I'll also post the link to that report in the chat. With this context in mind, I am pleased to have with us 2 environmental leaders. From the United States, Professor Akua Asa-Awuku, who is also the Associate Dean for Diversity Equity in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at the University of Maryland, and past president of the American Association for Aerosol Research, AAR. And from Canada, Naolo Charles, founder of the Black Environmental Initiative and co-founder of the Canadian Coalition for Environmental and Climate Justice. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To kickstart the event, each invited speaker will give a short presentation on their work and approach in relation to the theme of today's event, followed by the moderated Q&A. So we invite you to post your questions and comments for the speakers. So we'll start the presentations with Professor Akua Asa-Awuku. So go ahead, Akua, and start sharing.
Okay, hopefully you can see what my slides.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to thank you, Professor Hind Al-Abadleh, for the invitation to come talk, and also to the ARRCU and the CMOS communities for having the opportunity to speak on this very important issue. I was asked to first talk about some of the things that I have done in this space to give you an idea of my motivations in this space. So I start off by saying that climate science is fundamentally geoscience, right? And geoscience is very broad. It covers anything that is interested in the earth and sustainability of people on earth. And I say that because there's traditional geoscience jobs, and we realized several years ago there's non-traditional geoscience work. And so roughly 4 years ago, my fellow PIs and I put together a project called Providing Educational Access and Research Learning in the Geosciences. And this specifically was targeted for non-traditional geoscience majors. I'll elaborate on what that is: women, underserved, and underrepresented minorities, and it's funded through the NSF. And so I'm just one of 3 PIs on this work. My fellow collaborators, Dr. Duncan, Dr. Terrell Shockley, are also professors at UMD. And we realized through our conversations that we all engage in this non-traditional geoscience, and we had different pathways to geoscience. I myself, all my degrees are in engineering. However, my research is in atmospheric science and climate science. I'm interested in particles and how they affect cloud interactions and climate. And so there's ways in which those who do not have specific geoscience degrees can engage in the geoscience workforce. So the motivation for some of this work is that we know there's a need to increase the geoscience workforce, particularly in the US. This is from the US Department of Labor and Statistics. We know that the baby boomers and the millennials are currently the largest sector of our workforce. However, when we wrote this proposal, and we are currently in right now, the baby boomers have reached a retirement age, and so they are all leaving the geoscientific workforce. And so we need to fill that gap with the talent that is the talent of our youth. What do we know about the workforce coming in? It's more diverse than the workforce going out, right? So we need to think about ways to train, educate the geoscientific workforce that is more diverse. We also know that to tackle some of these grand challenges, such as climate, we need innovative ideas. And it's been well documented that diversity increases innovation. And so we need that in the geoscientific workforce. So as I mentioned, we think about traditional geoscience, right? When I asked you to think about what you think about when you think about geoscientists and what they do and what they look like, but then there's also non-traditional geoscience work. An example of that is earth science teachers in middle school. They have education degrees and certification, but they're teaching earth science, so they're teaching geoscience. Another example, we always talk about machine learning and AI, computer scientists, but we apply that to geoscientific systems such as Google Maps, GIS. So you have to have a fundamental knowledge of geoscience to apply those tools. And some other examples of non-traditional geoscience work that don't necessarily take traditional geoscience degrees. And so with this program, we've developed 4 major platforms. One, we do some recruitment and retention through geoscience seminars, and we're out there as PI saying, hey, we can be role models, and we encourage you to join our program. Second, we have developed an introduction to geoscience learning targeted for non-traditional geoscience majors. So it can be anything from biology to chemistry to architecture, thinking about how to use those degrees in the geoscience workforce. And so we go over some key terminology. We go over ways that you can interface with earth science, geoscience, and climate science with your non-traditional geoscience degree, and to think about holistically what you would like to do in the future. We also have opportunities for these students to further pursue certifications within geoscientific fields. It turns out in Maryland that we don't have a geoscience certification, but some states do. And so you can go out and look for this and then add that to your resume when you're applying for these geoscientific jobs. And lastly, we do a lot of day visits to federal labs. So Maryland, it's close to the DC area. We do have a lot of federal labs here, but we also go to places like the EPA in Raleigh, North Carolina. And we meet people and role models for our students so they can see what the geoscience workforce looks like. So I end here to say that there's a lot of work to be done. We are really interested in expanding access, not just to geoscience majors, but to also non-traditional geoscience majors, women, underserved, and underrepresented minorities. So thank you for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Professor Asa-Awuku. That was a very nice, kickstart to the event with data and initiatives. And congratulations on receiving the grant to get it off the ground and to get, to the field and get the students out there. That's wonderful. Okay, so next we have with us Naolo Charles, and I'll share the slides that Naolo provided, so you can tell me when to flip, whenever you want me to.
Okay, I will. Okay. So first of all, I just wanted to explain that at B Initiative, we actually have 3 main programs. If you want, you can move to the next slide. And I have some images that shows that. Okay. So we have 3 main programs. The first one is environmental education. The second one, green jobs. The third one, community energy. And all these programs are interconnected, which means that we need to invest in environmental education so that we can create green jobs in the community and eventually engage communities in community energy projects. So the green job strategy for us is also a strategy to create more alignment between our communities and the environmental movement. So unlike programs like the carbon tax, which can be perceived as being an environmental cost to communities, even if it was designed with the best of intentions, our focus is on making sure that we don't present environmental action as a cost to our communities, but instead as a benefit. So the green jobs piece is a big part of that strategy. And as we started working on green jobs, we identified 3 main types of green employments that are priorities in our communities. The first one is environmental policy jobs, so that members of our communities are at the table where decisions are made. Green construction jobs, so that those among us who with no advanced education can still participate in green employment. And finally, environmental science jobs, so that members of our communities create the technological and technical solutions to our complex issues and, to climate change and environmental racism realities. So what we learned in 4 years of doing this work is that when we talk specifically about environmental science jobs, Black people have what I call a triple jeopardy that prevents them from being full participants and leaders in the environmental science. So the first jeopardy is the fact that systemic racism tends to reduce opportunities for Black professionals, not just in science, but in all sectors. So that's the first level. The second jeopardy is the fact that Black people are actually underrepresented in science in general. And the third one is that Black people are underrepresented in the environment. So there's actually 3 levels of complexity when it comes to Black people being able to lead successful environmental science careers. So we realized that in order to promote more Black people in environmental science, we needed also to promote STEMs in Black communities, while also promoting environmental action and a passion for environmental action. However, there's a lot of evidence here in Canada and in America that Black people tend to be underrepresented in science. And in order to better understand this situation, we partnered with CMOS and CRWA, and we ran a small study to investigate the root cause of this lack of representation. The results of the BI investigation were actually informed by a survey with 33 questions and semi-structured interviews of 19 diverse professionals from the water, weather, and science sectors. And we also had another survey with 36 questions that went to 52 Black and BIPOC youth. And in the research, we were trying to assess several hypotheses, but in the report, we actually kept only 3 of them. And the first hypothesis we wanted to investigate was, is the lack of early exposure to science the root cause of this underrepresentation? And so even if it was a small study, I would say it wasn't really conclusive. While we can actually say that early exposure to science definitely seems to be a good predictor of a future career in science, many of the existing Black scientists we talked to had later exposures to the discipline and were still able to do it. We also didn't find a lot of evidence that Black people that are born in Canada are exposed to less science than other races when they're young. Of course, in terms of socioeconomics, We have access to less good quality of education. We understand that, but we really didn't find a lot of evidence that the early exposure is the root cause of the problem. The second hypothesis that we looked into was to investigate whether a lack of interest in science was a root cause of this lack of representation. And lots of reports and studies do actually confirm exactly the contrary. Black youth tend to be more interested in science than their white counterparts, according to some studies. So what could actually explain this underrepresentation? And that leads us to the third hypothesis that we looked into. And it was about the limiting impact of stereotypes on Black youth career paths in science. And pretty much every scientist we talked to confirmed the existence of negative stereotypes on Black people and science. So while early exposure to science and the level of interest in science could be factors that can predict someone's potential in science, their lack in the Black community is not really the root cause. Based on this study, it's not really the root cause of the underrepresentation, but they could actually be symptoms of it. Negative stereotypes seem to be more of a root cause phenomenon that actually limits Black professional potential in science. And this insight for us is really huge because it means that it's not just on the weather and the water science sector alone to fix this issue. This is an issue that requires a holistic approach, a multi-sectoral approach that is less about skills building. Skills building matters, but it's also about changing cultural norms. So what is the culture that actually limits Black youth potential in science? What culture exactly do we talk about? So Hind, if you can move to the next slide. Okay, so the way you want to understand this graphic is that me as a 6'3" Black man, if you know nothing about me, and I tell you today that one day I want to be a basketball player in the NBA, it will not be something that surprises you. It will be something expected, not just because I'm tall, but because I'm Black. People from our community also will feel the same. This is because we are, in my opinion, dealing with a crisis of collective imagination that actually started since day one of colonization. So the way we were educated, the way we were taught our history, the stories that we all know, the imagery that we are exposed to on a day-to-day basis creates a large body of knowledge that we can use to evaluate whether this tall Black man can be a basketball player. And since anti-Black racism has been taught to most of us through education, we all start with the idea that human evolution means, Black people started as monkeys, became the modern man, and then can logically be great athletes. But it becomes less natural for us to think that we can come from monkeys to become modern men and eventually become scientists. So this last scenario is less natural and seems to be the exception. And this is, in my opinion, the core of the issue. Albert Einstein used to say, imagination is more important than knowledge. And I believe that we do have a crisis of collective imagination that is at the root of the lack of Black representation in sciences. And when I say this, I don't mean just in our community as a Black community, but also collectively, all of the races. The fact that we have a limited definition of who can be a scientist actually limits the potential. And there are many reasons for that. For instance, in psychology, there's a phenomenon they call the Pygmalion effect that is actually explaining that when you have expectations of people, they tend to live up to these expectations. So basically, if you have Black youth who grow up in an environment where people see them as a certain thing, then it tends to influence them into becoming these things. And of course, you're going to have some exceptions, some of them who will not follow the script and who will actually become successful. But what we need to do, in my opinion, is to raise the standards, shift the culture so that we can have a better, a more open definition of who's a scientist in society. And once we can do that, and this is harder work than just creating internships. It's deep change to the system and deep change to the way we think. And once we're able to do that, in my opinion, we're going to be raising the levels of opportunities for everyone. That's it.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Naolo.